We're starting a new section, section 5.2, and we're going to deal with what happens when you have exponents that are 0. So let's start. Let's say that we have a number. We're going to represent it with a, and it's raised to the 0 exponent. The simple rule is that anything raised to the 0 power is just 1. So that's a rule that you need to memorize. Now, negative exponents. We talked about in the previous section about how to avoid a negative exponent, but sometimes you just really can't avoid a negative exponent. But you can always rewrite a negative exponent. So let's start raising our number a to a negative exponent. All this is telling us to do is to move this to where we have a positive exponent, and that just tells us to move it either from the numerator to the denominator or the denominator to the numerator. So in this case, if I have 1 over a to the negative n, then I will move it up to the numerator and make it positive. So the negative just tells us to switch where it's from. So let's do some examples. Example 1. It's never proper to write a fraction with negative exponents, so we're not going to do that. But we are going to start with making all of our exponents positive before we do any combining. So, set up a big fraction here. Now the first thing that I see is this 6. Okay, it has a negative 1 exponent. So we're going to move that 6 down to the denominator. Now, 6 to the 1 is just 6, so we don't need to rewrite the 1 because it's understood. Let's look at the x. The x has a negative 2, and all that tells us is that we are going to move that x from the numerator down to the denominator. Now the z, that z cubed, that actually is already positive, so it's going to stay. Let's take it one at a time. Okay, that takes care of the numerator. Let's go to the denominator. 5 to the 0. So what was the rule that we talked about? Anything raised to the 0 power is 1. So 5 is 1. We don't need to write that again. We can just understand that it's there. Now in the denominator, we have an x to the negative 1. So we're going to bring that up to the numerator. No need to write the 1 because we understand it's there. And then we are going to bring up that z to the negative 2 up to the top. Well, that's not simplified. We want to simplify it. Now, let's start with the z's. Z cubed times z squared. We add our exponents. So we're going to have z to the 5th. The 6 is simplified. We're going to leave it alone. Now remember from the previous section, when you have a same variable in the numerator and the denominator, you can simplify by subtracting the exponents. So this x here is understood to have a 1. So we're going to subtract it and take it to the bigger exponent. So x squared minus, or divided by, basically x to the 1st. So 2 minus 1 is just 1. And this is what we mean by write without negative exponents. Okay, same thing with example 2, except now we have a negative 1 to distribute. So we're going to start by distributing the negative 1 before we care anything about the 4m negative 2 over n. So remember, you can distribute so by multiplying the exponents. So this gives us m raised to the negative 3 divided by 3 to the negative 1 and n to the negative 2. Well, before I relocate anything, we have 2 m's and we have 2 n's. Let's just go ahead and combine those, and then we will worry about those negatives in a moment. So we're going to add negative 2 and negative 3 to give us a negative 5. Divide. Put my negative 1 right here. And we're going to add this 1 for this n and the negative 2, and that gives us a negative 1 also. So from what I can see, I need to relocate the 3 the m and the n. The 4 stays because it has a positive exponent. So I'm going to keep my 4, multiply it by 3 to the first, which is just 3, and an n, and I'm going to relocate the m down to the bottom. And one last step, multiply the 4 times the 3, and we can consider ourselves simplified. Okay, now when I say express without exponents, that means we're not going to have any variables, and we want to completely evaluate our problem. Now we can't multiply the 2 and the 3, they've got powers to them, and according to PEMDAS, we have to take care of our exponents first, so that's what we're going to do. So that 2 has a negative exponent, which tells me I need to relocate the 2 to the denominator with a positive exponent. And I can go ahead and raise the power. 3 squared is 3 times 3, which is 9. Okay, now remember, multiplying fractions is understood. There's a 1 underneath a whole number. So 1 times 9. 2 squared, which is 4, times 1. So this is our simplified fraction. Next example. Again, we have to take care of that power. Now, we have a couple of options. I'm going to use PEMDAS, which tells me to relocate what's inside the parentheses first. So I'm going to deal right here with this 5. And inside the parentheses, we're not going to worry about negative 2 yet. So it's still negative, but we're going to take that 5 and put it in the denominator. And then we have this negative 2. So when we distribute the negative 2, I'm going to take this negative, I'm going to attach it to that 1. So we're going to have negative 1 to the negative 2 power. And then we're going to have 5 to the negative 2 power. And what this tells us to do is move the negative 1 to the denominator and move the positive 5 to the numerator. So that's what we're going to do. So we're going to have 5 squared, negative 1 squared. That gives us 25 over 1, which just gives us 25. Okay, our last example. We're going to express this without 0 or negative exponents. So remember, if you get a 0 exponent, it's just equal to 1. So just like the last problem, I'm going to begin by distributing my negative exponents, or actually distributing all of my exponents. So remember, when you do a power to a power, we are going to multiply. So that gives us x to the negative 2 over y to the negative 1, because this y has an understood 1 right there, and we're multiplying. The next one, x to the positive 2 over y to the 4th, 2 times 2. Okay, let's take a look at this. I want to multiply across the numerator, then multiply across the denominator. Remember, we're going to add our exponents. So that gives us x to the negative 2 plus 2. We're going to have y to the negative 1 plus 4. Negative 2 plus 2 is 0. So 0 over y to the 3rd. That's not simplified because x to the 0 is equal to 1. And there we go.